the BJA's Capacity Enhancement for Backlog Reduction PMT Metrics Training. This session will focus on performance reporting in BJA's performance management tool for CEBR and will address many FAQs about CEBR performance reporting. Please note that this training is specific to reporting in the PMT and will not address any program-specific issues. My name is Kerwin Henderson, and I am the BJA TTA Specialist on our Planning, Performance, and Impact team. And we are happy you joined us today and are excited to present this overview. Before we get started, I want to let you know that this training is being recorded and will be posted on the BJA multimedia page and the BJA YouTube channel. The links to both websites are posted in the chat, will be posted in the chat, and will be displayed at the end of this presentation. If you run into any tech issues throughout the session today, please follow the directions on the screen and send those concerns over in a private chat message to Catherine McCarthy, our WebEx system facilitator, who can then help you along your way. We also encourage you to ask questions using the chat box function by submitting your questions to all attendees. When asking a question, please include your name and your email address so that we can follow up with you if needed. Any questions we are unable to answer during live time today or that we do not get to, the team will take your question and follow up with you via email. We will be providing contact information for the PPI team at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our presenters today, Nicole Norvesh, an analyst on the PPI team, and Andrea Borchardt, the BJA CEBR Program Manager.
Thank you, and welcome to the Bureau of Justice Assistance training webinar for the Capacity Enhancement for Backlog Reduction Program's Performance Metrics. I'm Andrea Borchardt, a Senior Forensic Policy Advisor at BJA. Before we get started, I wanted to announce that the CEBR awards have been going out, and we expect to have them all made by the end of the week for the FY21 season. Thank you for your patience as we've worked through this award season. Thank you also for attending this webinar. We've listened to the feedback and hope this is an opportunity to meet your needs with respect to questions about CEBR performance measures. Finally, and most importantly, thank you all for your dedication and service to your community by processing forensic DNA cases to support an evidence-based criminal justice system. The agenda for today is to provide a purpose for the webinar, to briefly discuss the CEBR authorizing legislation, to discuss the management of this program, the performance management at BJA, as well as the CEBR performance progress reports and performance measures, provide you some examples and contact information and resources. The purpose today is to explain BJA management of awards and the performance measures, provide a background on why CEBR has performance measures and what we do with these reported values that you give to us, to provide an explanation of why performance measures may change over time, to provide you with some examples of supporting documentation for the measures that you report, and again, resources and contact information for assistance. A little bit about the W. Smith Act that helps us, that authorizes the program. It was originally authorized by the DNA Analysis Backlog Elimination Act of 2000, and most recently reauthorized in 2019 through the W. Smith Act. I've highlighted a couple of sections of importance to you with respect to this program. Specifically, the authorization of grants where the Attorney General may make grants to eligible states or units of local government for use by the state or unit of local government for the following purposes: to carry out for inclusion in CODIS, DNA analysis of samples collected under applicable legal authority, in other words, DNA database samples. Part 2, to carry out for inclusion in CODIS, the analysis of samples from crime scenes. And 3, to increase the capacity of laboratories owned by state or units of local government to carry out DNA analysis of the samples described, specified in paragraphs 1 and 2. In other words, to increase your capacity to process DNA database samples or crime scene samples. And then funding is typically appropriate for, quote, the purposes authorized under Section 2 of the DNA Analysis Backlog Elimination Act of 2000. I highlight the previous slide to just give you an idea of how we go about creating our solicitations and why there's maybe some strict reasons or purposes that we keep you under for when you're using your funding. Additionally, another point to note with the W. Smith DNA Backlog Grant Program is there's a section that requires each state or unit of local government which receives a grant under this section shall submit to the Attorney General for each year in which funds from a grant received under this section is expended, report such time in such a manner as the Attorney General may reasonably require, which contains 1, a summary of the activities carried out under the grant, and assessment of whether such activities are meeting the needs identified in the application. And we process this or require this through the progress reports that you submit semi-annually. And 2, such other information as the Attorney General may require, which helps us with the performance metrics. And again, we capture the performance metrics through the progress reports to help evaluate the effectiveness of the strategies used by grantees to achieve the objectives of the project and the effectiveness of the program. And again, final report should include a recap of all your goals and objectives in the narrative section and an assessment as to whether the activities accomplished under the program were successful in achieving those goals. The award management, once a formula award is made and we process this program, the CEBR program, as a formula program, there are 3 main groups that interact with the grantee. There's the programs office, which handle your day-to-day activities. You might know them as Shalia or Kathy or Monty or Christine. These are the people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis and tell you about your withholdings or help you process your GAMs to make changes to your program. There's the policy office where I sit. We review the initial applications and we provide any forensic subject matter expertise that the programs office may need when processing any of your requests for changes to your awards. And there's the performance management team. They collate and analyze the data provided by the grantees yourselves within the progress report, such as your turnaround time or your backlog. And as we advance this presentation, I will turn the topics over to Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Nicole Norvish, and I'm a research associate on the PPI team. I'm going to start off with what is performance management. It's the process by which grantees collect data on their grant activities to determine if they are completing activities as intended and achieving their goals and objectives. And measures are the data points that are collected using the questionnaires established for each program. So when you report quarterly in your report, you're reporting performance measures for us to review. Questionnaires can be found on the BJA performance measures webpage linked here. Please. So measures data. The reason is twofold. First, BJA uses the data for several objectives, including identifying areas of success, potential areas of improvement, grant activities and progress towards program goals, finding how the grant funds are being distributed, and comply with law. Benefits to you as grantees, including identification of areas of improvement, ability to proactively request TJ help, address any challenges, and track evidence of progress as program goals, which advocates for sustainability. 2021 CEBR performance measures are the same as last year's FY 2020. There has been no change. Now I'm going to shift to discussing supporting documentation, including some best practices. We ask for supporting documentation because it's a federal requirement for grantees to provide it. Pathways that grantees typically use to meet this requirement can organize into 2 spreadsheets. Work with each performance metric in a separate tab, and a second spreadsheet with databasing with each performance metric in a separate tab. Some grantees choose to upload attachments separated by performance metric number with a table of content. Anything that is submitted can be released in response to FOIA requests. Inputs are okay to use as supporting documentation, but you must explain how the values were vetted before submission. And here's an example list of great supporting documentation provided by a grantee. The PMT report is provided, and each additional document is separated by metric, and everything is clearly named. Here's an example of great supporting documentation. This is a screenshot from what the Pennsylvania State Police have provided. Again, each attachment represents supporting documentation for a different metric. Everything is clearly marked and uploaded in an organized manner. This is extremely helpful to us as we go through your documentation. Discussing some common mistakes we see and how to rectify them. So the most consistent data quality submission issue is that grantees provide sufficient documentation for only part of the metrics. in the July to December 2020 submission period, 55% of all documentation was partially submitted, which means supporting documentation was missing for at least 1 to 2 metrics. Labeling the uploaded document. Clear labeling the attachments helps with organization. This can help you ensure that everything gets uploaded, and it helps us to understand what supporting documentation is present and where to find each measure. The explanation for how metrics were calculated document should be included with uploads. We're looking at over 250 reports per reporting period, so anything you can do to organize and make your documentation clear is a huge help for us. Inadvertent Excel counting using formulas, so please ensure any formulas that you use to track data are tracking accurately. Next, spreadsheets may need to be aggregated to acquire the correct metric. Aggregate all necessary spreadsheets before submission. Created list of cases completed, CODIS uploads, or CODIS hits. As aggregate these in advance, there are software discrepancies that sometimes don't allow BJA staff to automate aggregating the metric of interest. Metric 6, if your lab separates serology and DNA cases in reporting, you likely cannot average the 2 turnaround times. If one serology case with a 2-day turnaround time and 99 DNA cases with an average turnaround time of 98 days, the turnaround time is not 298 divided by 2. It's the number of days to process cases divided by single cases. One serology case times 2 of your turnaround time, 99 DNA cases times 98 turnaround time, all of that divided by the 100 cases to get a turnaround time of 97 days. 7. BJA defines backlog as a case that has been requested but not completed within 30 days. Different definitions, but when reporting performance measures, you must use the BJA definition. Consistency is key here. And cases submitted during reporting period. They include everything submitted for the forensic biology section. Starting at metric 9 and 10, total cases completed for this section. Metric 10, cases completed with grant funds may not encompass all or even any cases completed. Sometimes these metrics will be the same and sometimes they will be different. For example, if grant funds were used for equipment, 10 will be 0, while 9 would not. And if funds were used for hiring a triage specialist, then the metrics would be the same. It all depends on how funds were distributed. Recently changed to reporting all samples completed by the laboratory, and this used to be samples completed per analyst. This change allows us to better assess whether labs are increasing capacity or not. 13, CODIS entries total for this section, which is metric 12, and those entered with grant funds, metric 13. 12 may not encompass all or any hits completed by the laboratory. The metrics may be the same or not depending on how funds are used. We provided a couple links. We have a number of resources available, including reporting guidance, training videos, and more. We included links to the performance measures page and the BJA YouTube channel. Put together some of our most frequently asked questions regarding CEBR performance measures and PMT. This is for question 7, number of backlogged forensic biology/DNA cases at the end of the reporting period. Is that referring to all cases? This question is asking for the number of casework, forensic biology, and DNA cases that are currently backlogged at your lab. It does not include database samples, which is in question 22. The differences between casework and database. Cases are forensic samples collected from crime scenes to be tested, analyzed, and included in CODIS if eligible. Data samples are those collected under applicable legal authority to be included in CODIS. This can include convicted offender and arrestee samples. Further information, including a helpful fact sheet, can be found at the link provided. If there's no grant activity during the reporting period, do I have to give a reason why, and do I have to provide supporting documentation? If there's no grant activity during the reporting period, you must provide a reason. If there's no grant activity, you do not need to submit documentation. We only need it when you are using grant funds and reporting the associated performance metrics. Net narrative questions reported, they're submitted on a semi-annual basis in January and July. And ask, what is the difference between total cases completed and CEBR cases completed? Total cases completed refers to the total number of cases completed by the lab independent of funding source. Cases completed refers to the total number of cases completed using CEBR funds. We just discussed FAQs for performance measures and PMT for CEBR. There is a more comprehensive guide, including general FAQs, coming to you soon. This includes FAQs for application documents, solicitation language, allowable uses of funding, past funding, and more. This guide will be sent out soon. Giants Help Desk is open to help you. Here are the hours of operation, a phone number, and email address that you can contact. And there are some training and resources at the link provided. On the left is some BJA PMT Help Desk contact information and hours of operation. And if you need to contact directly with any questions or concerns, you can find our emails to the right. Thank you for your hard work and dedication. And with that, we will begin our questions and answers session. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicole and Andrea. Before we jump into our Q&A session, I know Michael Adams, another analyst on our team, had some clarifying information on one of the slides. So Michael, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Kerwin, and excellent job, Nicole and Andrea. I wanted to provide one clarifying remark on one of the earlier slides where it stated that 55% of the reports were missing one or two metrics. So when we're reviewing all of the CEBR awards and reports, we kind of code each individual performance metrics that the grantee submits on an individual basis. So sometimes when there's occurrences where, let's say, a grantee added their CODIS uploads, CODIS hits, but they're missing their is completed, we'll code that as an unverifiable instance, and we'll further code it saying that supporting documentation is missing. So that specific metric where we said 55% of reports were missing one of two metrics, that is of the unverifiable instances that we've coded. So essentially half of the unverifiable instances, usually a specific grantee at that specific reporting period was missing one or two metrics. Thanks, Carmen.
Thanks, Mike. So at this time, we'll go ahead and transition to our Q&A session. If you have not already done so, please use the chat box function to submit your question to all attendees. Our team is on the line and ready to answer your questions. When asking a question, please include your name and your email address so that we can follow up with you if needed. We will answer the questions in the order that they're received. Also, please note that we will only be taking questions related to the PMT operations as they relate to CEBR. I see we have one question that has come in already, and Andrew, if you want to go ahead and take this one. How do we handle performance reporting if we have more than one CEBR award, different fiscal years, active and accepted at the same time? Should we wait to provide actual numeric data for the answer for the newer CEBR until the older CEBR grant is closed or expended? This person is just concerned that they might be reporting this same data and it could get confusing. So Andrew, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, thank you, Kerwin, and thank you, Danielle, for your question. If you have two active awards that are currently you're using funds for both of them at the same time with the different fiscal years, and we have a lot of grantees in this situation. If you're using funds, you must provide performance metrics. And I'm with you on the concern about doubly reporting. You definitely cannot double report. you have to have a method to separate the grant activities across the different grants and the function across the different grants, such that you can also separately report the performance measures. There can be a number of ways to do this. Perhaps it would depend on the way you're using the funds for your grant. I would encourage you to reach out if you have specific questions about the way you're managing your grant, to reach out to your grant manager, and they can loop me in to provide maybe specific advice to you. But the shorter answer is you must report performance measures for any grant that is currently open and using funds, and you may not double report the same data across both grants.
Thanks, Andrea. I see that we have another question that came in about going back to this slide with a formula on it. I know our Catherine McCarthy, she'll flip back to it for those of you that can write it down. I have a few more questions that have come in. This question is about how do you recommend supplying supporting documentation for CODIS hits, since per the DNA Identification Act, we cannot share information about the matches. Can we just put a number and say supported by CODIS search? I don't know, Andrea or Nicole, which of you would be better suited to answer that question?
This is Andrea. I can take it. I think that question was from Melissa, and thank you for that, and thank you for your attention to the DNA Identification Act. Again, anything provided to us can be FOIA'd, can be released through the FOIA process. So I've seen some grantees redact the case-specific information, so there might be a section that be blacked out. There's a number of ways that this can be done. Some people are able to use their LIMS system to provide an output for CODIS hits. There's a number of ways. If you have specifics, again, about the way you are doing it that didn't fall into the categories that I described, again, I encourage you to reach out to your specific grant manager. I will also include my email into the chat, so anybody can contact me directly as well.
Andrea, another question has come in. A case is identified in the PMT as a request for analysis. If within a case we complete analysis and issue a report, and then we get additional evidence on that same case, we have been instructed to count that as one case. In terms of turnaround time average, however, are we to still consider it as one case? So the turnaround time would span from the first submission date until the last report is issued, or is separate submission dates as separate turnaround times? So should we have separate submission dates as separate turnaround times? Excuse me, Andrea or Nicole.
This is Andrea. I can take this one too.
Okay.
I think this is from Susan. So Susan, thank you for the question. Within each laboratory, there is you may have a different definition on what you call a case. Some laboratories are identifying a case as a single request for analysis that comes in with a recognition that a particular incident, let's say a single homicide, may have multiple case requests. Other laboratories are identifying, I think the way that you are describing, that a single event like that single homicide is to be considered one case. What we are asking you to do, we are not putting recommendations on which one should be considered a case, either of the ways that I described, but we do ask that you define it in that explanation of how metrics were calculated document, so we can understand how you are calculating the turnaround time and how you're calculating your cases.
Thanks, Andrea. We had another question come in. Are there any plans to use only just grants for performance reports and doing away with PMT?
Yeah, that's a great question. At some point, the program will be migrating to just grants, but as of right now, we don't have any further information on that. For this upcoming fiscal year, we expect the CEBR program to report into PMT. But when that migration happens, we will make sure to notify all the grantees when that happens. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. We've had one more question come in. During the presentation, it was mentioned common mistakes in reporting. Do we notify the laboratory of these mistakes when noticed?
When we're reviewing the PMT reports, we're of course doing this in conjunction with the forensic scientists and the state policy advisors. So all of the information that we code, Nicole and I, we send to the state policy advisors and the forensic scientists to kind of give them heads up on a specific report. So for any scenarios where, especially we see potential numerical discrepancies, usually we send it to the state policy advisor and they reach out to the grantee. But as long as we have permission from the state policy advisor, reach out to the grantee organization on our own and try to make sure we code or recode that specific occurrence so we can change it in the data in PMT and for our record keeping. Again, for unverifiable instances, that's a little bit different. It's a less clear path to essentially rectify that specific issue. So we do code it and say, hey, okay, these cases completed weren't verifiable for this submission period, but don't necessarily reach out to the grantee because we're trying to build a TTA strategy to make sure you guys have these guidelines, and maybe possibly for the next reporting period, you'll be able to provide verifiable information. But since the unverifiable instances are more frequent than the potential numerical discrepancies, we don't reach out to every single grantee for those specific instances.
Got another question come in. Is it possible to get a summary of the metrics and which numbers should include total cases and which numbers should include grant-specific cases? This presentation has some great slides, but that is often a stumbling block for us as new questions have been added to the metrics. I will say on the PMT website, which will either in the presentation or provide the link to that, all of the question sets to all the various programs are on there. And I don't know if the rest of the team, if you have other resources that you could provide them for the different questions in terms of what the questions are for CEBR.
I would add one thing, Kerwin. So we've been discussing this. So for the upcoming reporting period, there are going to be two populations that will be reporting. We're going to make sure that we provide additional user guide information and get that kind of mapping, because there are essentially 2 or 3 different questions from FY19 to FY20. Of course, FY20 and FY21 is the same, but we'll make sure we provide that information in the communications that we send out during the open session period. So we'll make sure we include that this time.
Hello,
Thanks, Mike.
Kerwin, this is Anne. I just want to add a little bit to Melissa's question to clarify. I know it can seem frustrating when different metrics, new questions, and performance measures are added. Sometimes we have to add those due to changes in the legislation. Sometimes we have to do those because there's been either an internal review at DOJ or an external review from an entity such as GAO that has asked us to capture additional measures to help us with the evaluation. So I want you to know we don't change the measures without a lot of thought and the impact that it will have on the grantees. So we're hopeful that the metrics that we have now will be able to hold us for a number of years as we do continuous evaluations. And Melissa, to further answer your question, with FAQ guide that we intend to send out in the next few weeks, we will I'll include some additional information that Michael explained to make sure that that's getting out to you guys.
Thanks, Andrea. And I think there's a follow-up to that, I think clarifying what grant-funded assistance is. They explained they use grant funds to purchase data bank collection devices, but those were not considered a supply that they should track.
Melissa, I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, so I'm going to ask you to email me, and perhaps we can set up a call to specifically discuss your database collection device question.
Thanks, Andrea. Another question come in. The solicitation says that funds may be used to send forensic DNA to fee-for-service laboratories for analyses. What might the expenses include?
This is Andrea. So typically, grantees that are using funds to send forensic DNA for fee-to-service laboratories for analysis, again, with the purposes of CEBR to process database samples for CODIS and crime scene samples for CODIS, it would typically include that type of processing, so STR processing for entry into CODIS.
Thanks, Andrea. Another question: for cases completed with CEBR funds during a period, can it be for cases with samples worked in that time period, or does it have to be completed? Cases with samples completed versus cases completed.
Okay, so here's the question again. So the question is, for cases completed with CEBR funds during a period, can it be for cases of samples worked in that time period, or does it have to be completed? And then the question is cases with samples completed versus cases completed. So we're looking specifically at the cases completed for that, and the case should be completed. I think you're talking about if you maybe have extracted or amped the sample and you haven't issued the report, then that would fall under that you've worked it in that time period, but it hadn't been completed. And what we're looking for is when it has been completed, the case has been completed. And we do have an attendee who, with a good request, there's been some questions, and I think perhaps that's maybe where the previous Susan was asking a question. We'd have some questions over whether or not forensic genetic genealogy is able to be used under this program. And currently, the assessment is that funds from the CEBR program cannot be used for forensic genetic genealogy purposes because that type of testing is not destined for entry into CODIS. Again, the purposes of this program are to process samples for CODIS and to increase the capacity of labs to process samples for CODIS.
Andrea. And one more question. CODIS entries include any of the CODIS categories, forensic, legal, etc., correct?
Yes, the CODIS entries, we do not differentiate between the different categories. So that would be how your laboratory defines it. And if your laboratory defines it as all of the categories, then yes, those should be included. And again, that can be helpful to us if you use that, if you explain that methodology within that explanation of how metrics were calculated document. Again, that's very valuable to us as we evaluate your performance measures.
Thanks, Andrea. I think we'll go ahead and wrap up today. Again, if you all have any follow-up questions, please contact us through the PMT Help Desk or directly reach out to me, your TTA specialist, or your BJA grant manager. We will respond to questions not answered during today's session by email over the next few days. We are happy to help you in any way that we can, and we appreciate all that you do. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we hope that you all have a great rest of the day. Thank you.